rock this.
11:06. Let's get it on and popping, as the kids say.
Ooh.
And I expect zero judgment for that one. But all right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Agencies Talk. This is the weekly digital marketer show hosted by President Mark DeGrasse, where he gets to sit down with agencies and those who serve agencies to talk about what's working now, what the future holds, and how we can all win in this crazy marketing world. Today, we are joined by Dustin Riechmann, the founder of Simple Success Coaching, where he helps agency owners, consultants, and coaches add 6 figures to their businesses through podcast guesting, which, if you can guess what we're talking about today, podcast guesting. Yeah. He's also a former agency owner and the co-founder of a successful e-commerce brand, FireCreek Snacks. So, of course, I'm expecting snacks during this talk. But I'll go ahead and kick it on over. Mark, take it away.
All right. Welcome, Dustin. So we did that podcast. What was that, 3-4 weeks ago? I'm not
I
good
think
at
it
time.
released about 3 weeks ago. Yep.
3 weeks ago. Man, I was like, was it months ago? It could have been. But it was a blast. And podcasting, we do a lot of that here at Digital Marketer. And I know you've expanded a ton using podcast guesting as a kind of medium for distributing the information that you create. So why don't we just launch into it? Why should we all be podcast guests?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people by default, when you say podcast, they think of being a host and starting a show and all the production. And this alternative, or you can do both, obviously, but this alternative is just a much more direct way. Like, you can go choose the audiences you want to speak to and then make a compelling pitch to that host, be featured, and then go to the next one. And so the host has already aggregated the attention, and your target market's sitting there tuning in on purpose. So I've just found it's special in a lot of ways. One, because you get to choose who you're talking to. 2, because it's long form and educational. So you can go through the build, the know, like, and trust cycle, like in one episode, instead of having 18 or 800 touch points or whatever the new standard is. So yeah, I think those are kind of 2 of the main reasons on the surface.
Love it. Well, Cosm says 5,000. I think it just was the last, or was it 500? Might have been 500. No, I
probably 500.
Something crazy. Yeah, it's probably 500. I was like, it sounded crazy at the time, but 500. I'm like, oh, that's doable. So I love how you talked about the know, like, and trust. So can you kind of walk us through how you kind of structure your guesting in terms of following that format?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the interview itself, so maybe it's easier if I talk more like kind of the overall framework of
Sure.
how we approach guessing, because then this will make I get a lot more specific kind of with the question you just asked. So we talk about 5 Ps, and I'll go through each of them real quickly. But the first one's purpose. So that's really answering, why would I want to be on a podcast? Like, how does it serve my business? It's not just to go put in reps and be on podcasts. It's for a purpose. And that can be summed up in, like, what's your call to action going to be? If you can answer that, then you know why you're on the show in the first place, and you know where you're leading people next in your sales cycle. So for agencies, that might be a lead magnet, a strategy session, et cetera. But it's like that, getting them in the top of your funnel. So step 2 is plan. So now I know why I want to be on shows, and I know what target market I serve. So now I'm going to go find the actual shows, right? This is doing the work, the research. And once you do that, you'll find it's a can of worms. There's thousands of opportunities. So then you have to prioritize it. So we talk about finding them and then prioritizing them. So that's step 2. Step 3 is pitch. So now I found some perfect shows that I think would be great for me. I could build my audience there, build my authority, but I have to get them to say yes. And this is kind of the part that trips a lot of people up. They see other people on podcasts. They're not really sure how they got on there, and they think that they're all buddies or they met at a conference. That happens occasionally, but it's much more often that the guest proactively sought out the opportunity. So we teach people how to pitch. Step 4 is perform. That's kind of getting to the core of your question, Mark, is, okay, now they said yes, what are you going to do when you get on there? So that actually starts to take shape in the pitch. So we can talk about the pitch in more detail, but the middle part of the pitch, email or LinkedIn message or whatever format you're using, is very clearly demonstrating what value you will bring your audience. And so I usually do that in like 4 bullet points, and that effectively becomes the show outline. So that is beneficial to the host, because they're like, sweet, this guy already wrote the outline. Like, we can just record it. And also really good for the guest, because it keeps everything on point and like structured towards your call to action, right? So you get to control a bit how the conversation might go. And then step 5 is profit. So that's how you make money from it, right? So people are familiar with like doing the work of getting on a show, and then they do it and then they don't do anything with it ever again. And so we're really big on leveraging each of these opportunities to actually get clients for our agency partners. Is that helpful?
Well, I love how you start, you kind of start with call to action, because I think, as marketers, we're always talking about the call to action, like you have to have a call to action. And then when it comes to us doing it, we're like, oh, people understand.
Right.
Instead of being
I'll just put myself out there, and
it's awareness,
Right.
And so I think the starting with the call to action is kind of how even with our content certification, that was it. It was like, okay, well, what's the purpose of this content? Otherwise, there's no real purpose, or there's accidental purpose. But I will say that if you focus too much on the call to action, the podcast interview could come and, start turning into a pitch, which I have, as a host, I'm like, oh crap, this person's selling and I need them to stop. And then what I'll do as a host is I'll try to switch it to personal. So I'll have a personal question there to throw off their pitch. But just in terms of you being interviewed, how do you balance the kind of pitching versus the organic, genuine personal content without making it seem like one or the other?
Yeah, I think the key there is really sharing real stories. So those real stories could be business outcomes ultimately, but they're unique and personal. So like you could interview 4 other people about podcast guesting, but hopefully my interview would stand out on its own because I have my own story. I got to 7 figures with an e-commerce brand selling $2 meat sticks on podcasts. Like no one else is gonna be able to say that. So I think just that, like, and that's part of those bullets, right? The bullets in our pitches are very important, and that may seem like a lot of work, but you reuse them all the time if you're staying in the same target market. So if I'm going to go talk about digital marketing and podcast guesting, like I know what agencies want. So in those 4 bullet points, I'll make sure that that's in there. But those aren't just facts and figures. Like this is how our course does this, or this is how my coaching does this. That would be pitchy, obviously. Instead, it's like case studies or like real life examples of how podcast guesting has turned into like really cool unicorn results for me or for clients, because that is selling in the sense that you're demonstrating how it works, but you're doing it in a way that is individual, personal, and in a lot of cases emotional. Like if you do it really well, you kind of got an emotional connection with the audience where they're like, oh, so Dustin was down on his luck and broken, the whole hero's journey, and like, but they can follow that and relate to it in some way. And I think that's where this is most effective if you can do it. I find that balance, because I've been on shows before where it's all personal. And it's kind of like, what's the point for me? Like I have a unique backstory and weird family stuff, I don't mind talking about it, but I don't really see, there is no call to action that results from that. And then there's shows that are, that's what it is. Just give me the facts, and it's kind of dry, right? Because it's like, well, it sounds like a webinar, like I want this to be a conversation. So I think there's a fine balance. And actually I would say the episode you and I did, I told you this before we hit record, is I think that's the favorite interview I've done over 50. That's like my favorite interview ever. I think you struck that balance, and we kept it really tight and concise. And I feel like that's obviously a skill that the host brings to it that makes a big difference.
No, thank you. And I think that was one of my favorite ones too. So it's, we're balanced there.
Cue the tape, Michelle. I want to get that quote.
I'm gonna put that. Actually, that's a great quote. That's a good way. I was going to get to repurposing in a little bit, but I love how just that little bit of balance, but also the structure, because I think that there's a fear with podcast guesting where you're like, oh, well, I don't want to go on and have the same pitch or the same call to action on every one of the podcasts, because people will listen to all these podcasts and they'll see what I'm doing. And just from actually, if you look at the people that you follow and you're like, oh yeah, like Jordan Peterson, that's one of the ones I listen to a lot. Yeah. And you'll hear consistently, like he makes the same point over and over and over again in multiple ones. And that's why it's memorable. It's not just because it was good. It's because he structured it and then delivered it again and again and again. And then he got better at it.
And that repetition is important, right? Like that's how we get better at talking about our agencies and what we do, is by talking about it a lot. And I think to your point there, I don't think you were even aware of this. The day you and I recorded Digital Marketer podcast, I was also on being recorded for Perpetual Traffic with Qasim and Ralph. And we talked about the same topic. They're extremely different interviews. Like ours was long. The other one, Perpetual Traffic, was like an hour and 20 minutes. They broke it into 2 episodes. There was a lot more storytelling. Yours and I episode had some stories in it, but it was much more structured and like, let's get this information in a tight format. And I've sent people to either one, kind of depending on what their interests are. If they want to know how to do something, I send them the digital marketer version. If they want to know more about my backstory and my personal life, in addition to podcast guesting, then I'll send them to the perpetual traffic option.
Oh, that's so funny.
Production company in the same day, very different outcomes.
Well, and that's what you have. But as long as you have that same, and like Cosmo was saying, the 500 times, it's like you can't have a different message every time, because then you're really just hitting the person once every, with each one. So there's no kind of unified objective that they're having. Now for repurposing, and I think that's whatever, the hot top, short form video, like everybody needs to work on short form. It's like, no, just take your long form and cut it down a little bit. That's your short form. But how do you kind of take a podcast episode and repurpose it for distribution on different channels, email, et cetera?
Yeah, so I've actually done a very poor job of this to date. So this is a very timely question. I'm working on it right now. I literally am interviewing an assistant 30 minutes after we're done here to help me start this process. Right. So I know what I want to do, so I can talk about that, but I won't claim to have done it very well. I think, short form video. I'll just say the tool. I found a tool as a guy that is actually in a current accelerator group I run. He's a software developer, a SaaS founder as well. It's called Video Snap. I'm sure there's other versions of this, but it takes like long form content, video or audio. In my case, it's mostly audio. It like sucks it up into the app. It transcribes it immediately. And if you go highlight like a quote or some text, it then uses AI to match that with like really slick B-roll kind of stuff and big, large captions. So you kind of instantly get this 30-second or 60-second, and you can put it in all the different formats. I mean, it happens in like a snap. That's what it's called, Video Snap. So it sounds like I'm promoting his tool, but I'm going to use that tool as an example to go, here's my affiliate link, but to go get into short form content for YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels and stuff like that. I don't do any of that. I'm pretty much only active on LinkedIn, but I know that there's a lot of gold nuggets and quotes, and there's all this stuff I should pull out. I think Costum said something to the effect of, people shouldn't even do paid ads. They should go do what Dustin's saying, do podcast guesting first. And I need to have that with this big, beautiful hair in a big image quote somewhere. So now I think there's a lot of opportunity in like 45-minute interview. There's a lot of how-tos, there's a lot of quotables. And I think, short form videos, images with quotes, obviously share it. You can share, on YouTube, you can share it on LinkedIn as a native video. And this is not my strong suit, is content repurposing. So that's why I'm going to hire someone to help me. I'm really good at generating the front end and like talking, but I'm really bad at the follow-up on the back end. I think there's a huge opportunity there though.
Well, yeah, and I think it's way easier. Like I think the long form and the getting on podcasts and doing, structuring your pitch and all that kind of stuff, that's the hard part. The easy part is like, I'll just pull out the best part and then plug it into here and then you're good. That's a really neat tool. I didn't realize, because I think I've used Video Snap before, but I didn't get into highlighting text and just have it generate a video.
It's pretty new, or at least this version of it's pretty new.
Okay.
Like he launched it as he's in I have a group that teaches people how to use podcasts to sell more of their stuff. And so that's one of the things he was focused on in there. So I'm more intimately aware of it than most people would be. But yeah, it's a cool tool. And like I said, I'm not endorsing that over other possible tools, but it is a good one.
No, that's fantastic. And like I said, I think that the podcast and doing the interview is actually the hard part, and then you can get into everything else. Now, in terms of pursuing being a guest, I'm sure you have your avatar, your customer avatar. How did you actually find the podcast, or do you locate a podcast like, hey, that's where my audience is, and then you approach them with a pitch? Is it specific to the podcast, or how's that process work?
It is, yeah. So it's kind of the purpose, the first step, we're talking about like, what target market do I want to start with? A lot of us have multiple target markets and it can be very overwhelming. So being as specific as possible, this is like classic marketing 101, whereas we as marketers are horrible at following our own advice and we want to serve everyone. But if you can find a specific target market, and maybe it's easier, I'll just use an example. So say you're a Facebook ads agency and your bread and butter client is like a Shopify food brand, right? Like my e-commerce brand. So when you're selecting the podcast, on one level, what everyone would think about is like, who has those people listening to the podcast? Is there brand owners listening to this podcast? And that's a good question, and that's a good qualifier. One layer deeper than that, there's kind of two layers deeper than that. So the second would be the peer-to-peer aspect of this. So do I really want a relationship with that host? Like if I really got to know Mark, what would that unlock for my business? Would he be a referral source? Those sort of things. So that just having a relationship with the host could be reason enough to pitch a show, as well as the peer-to-peer, the people that are listening that aren't necessarily going to be your client, but they're referral partners. So maybe there's Google Ads companies that serve Shopify stores, and like they would be an excellent referral partner. And that's part of the reason why you choose that show. Layer 3, which is like my favorite, is the deeper part of this. And this is a lot of what we focus on when we work with like agency owners. So if you think of an agency owner, everyone listening, you kind of have a sales pipeline, and you may feed that with Facebook ads or SEO or whatever, social content. This is another way of feeding the top of that funnel, is the podcast guesting with the people in the ether who want to raise their hand and get your lead magnet. And that all happens, and that's great. What also happens though with podcast guesting is you unlock access to this guest list. And this is like one of the strategies specifically for agency owners that I really like. And so I may choose a show based on who they've already interviewed. So if I'm this Facebook ads agency that's looking to serve Shopify food companies, I want to find shows that interview the founders of Shopify food companies. And it probably won't be the whole show, but it could be out of 100 guests, maybe like 100 previous guests, like 15 are actually brand owners who could use my services. Well, then that makes it really fun, because now I can pull them over into my more traditional sales prospecting kind of funnel and have a very warm conversation with them. Hey, I was featured on the same show as you. I would love to have you in my network. Then you connect, and then you go maybe look at their Facebook ads account and like give them some real value up front. But you don't seem like you're coming across as creepy and salesy, because you've got instant credibility by being on the show. So I went down a little bit of a wormhole there, but so for me, it's not as simple of a question of like, okay, is my target audience listening? That is a great reason to do it. That's the whole reason I got into podcast guesting, was to sell snack sticks, right? So, and I was I was like getting on shows talking about Shopify or marketing, and then my call to action was like, here's a coupon code to go get some snack sticks. It actually worked, but it obviously would have been a lot better if I was choosing people listening because they're on ketogenic diet, or people listening because they're a hiker. Like there's a lot better audiences I could have used it on, but I was just putting in reps and learning as I went. So I don't, that was a long answer to a brief question.
No. That was a fantastic answer. Well, because essentially what you're saying is you turned it into a marketing channel, just like paid ads are a marketing channel, or social media is a marketing channel. It's like, no, it's podcast guesting. That's a marketing channel, 100%. Which I think is fantastic. Well, and you have a very personal approach. And I've seen people, I get pitched all the time on emails like, hey, this person is so great and you should have them on your show. And I know it's a company that was obviously hired to pitch podcast guesting, and I've responded sometimes. Like I probably responded to like 5. The person never shows up to the show. Like it's incredible, where I'm just like, what the heck? Like I thought I was doing you a solid because you're obviously a firm looking for this, and then the person doesn't show up. Like what the heck? Do you think there's a way to manage that kind of automated approach? Because I vastly prefer your approach, which is personal connection. Really think about how you are, the purpose of the show itself for your business and your purpose for their business. It's a much better approach. But do you think, is there a way that you can automate what you do, or is it just,
parts of it? Yeah. So I'll tell a little more about my approach, and maybe we contrast that with other alternatives, because there are a few other ways to do this. The way I pitch is like it's like, think of it as an email, but then think that I could break this email into individual like direct messages. But as a master email, the first part is relational anchors, which is getting to your point. The second part is the like what's in it for your audience, or for the host audience. So basically that show outline I talked about earlier, it's the 4 bullet points that I could impart value to their audience with. And then the last piece is the call to action. So the middle and last piece are the same all the time if you stay in the same target market. You might tweak the bullets a little bit, right? If they have the host has a specific interest or niche, you might tweak that a little, but for the most part, that's a one-time workload. The part that is actual work is the first part, which is relational anchors, because it's got to be custom to every show and every host. So that is actually spending some time. I teach people how to use a virtual assistant to do this. So the point of being, can you do it automated? Kind of, but like it still requires a human. So we'll do research though, like brief research. It might be on their LinkedIn profile, and it might be just going to listen to an episode or look at some show notes. What I want to do though in that very opening piece of the email is Immediately make sure you know I'm not a random weirdo from the internet, right? That's task number one. I want Mark to know this is an actual person sending it and not an agent or not just an automated cold outreach. So I may say something like how's things going in Austin, or if we have something in common, I may reference that. Like I know you have business activity with your wife, and my first business was with my wife. So if I pick up on that, I could say, hey, Mark, fellow dad doing business with his wife over here. So great to connect today. Something that's real. And then I'll go quickly into like some form of flattery and showing that I've taken advantage of your content, like in a positive way. So usually the way that looks is referencing a specific episode and referencing specific takeaways and preferably like action I took with it. So, hey, Mark, like like I just said, here's something we have in common. And then immediately say, I wanted to reach out because in episode 351 with Ezra Firestone, Ezra shared this tactic for increasing his upsells on Shopify. We implemented it and it like totally worked. We got a 25% bump or something like that, where you're gonna be like, this guy is legit. Like he's actually values what I do. He's taken some time and looked at it. Like you're not going to ignore that email. You may not want me on the show, but you're not going to just ignore the email. And then we transition into, some easy way, like Ezra, I'm, also, very active on Shopify, but I take a different approach. Here's how I think I could serve your audience with a new episode, the 4 bullets. And then are you interested? Is my go-to call to action. Because then it's really easy for you to say, yes, like I'm interested, talk to Michelle. Or, yeah, I'm interested. Here's a calendar link. And if you do that, then if you reference a specific episode, you can actually pull that episode number and make that the subject line. So if you as a podcast host get an email that says episode 351 and the subject, you're going to open that. So you're like, this guy has a question. He wants to sponsor us. Like there's something controversial. Like I got to know what he wants. And so in a nutshell, that's how we write our pitches. So, but I don't write those pitches anymore. And the people that go through our program, we train their VA, or we help them actually hire a VA if they need one, to do that effectively. The research of finding the shows and writing the draft pitches, so that the entrepreneur learns how to do it, but they don't actually do it after we get that first master template. So in a sense, it's automated in that way. The alternative is there's 2 other alternatives. One is just send the same email to 10,000 hosts and you're going to get some yeses, probably, maybe not the most high quality shows, or people that actually screen their guests. And that's what you've experienced. And having 3 brands online, I get lots and lots of those types of emails and direct messages. But another alternative would be like an agency. So what you've experienced is an agency reaching out on behalf of their client and actually saying, I'm an agent for Qasim and like Qasim's really cool. I think that can work, but you have to have a certain level of authority established and some recognition. Like someone may actually want to interview Qasim because he's been at Traffic Conversion on stage and he's got his own big podcast or whatever. So like that can work if it's truly like an agent and almost like a celebrity. And that maybe the people you said, yeah, I would actually have them on, they didn't show, maybe that they fell into that bucket. More often than not, though, that's not going to work, I believe. So the alternative in that case with an agency, a podcast guest pitching agency, if you will, because those exist for sure. So I could hire someone to say, like, to write as me and kind of ghostwrite emails on my behalf. But the problem that everyone will encounter, I'm not like saying that that's a bad thing to do. It's very against my way of doing business. I feel strongly, just as you said earlier, that this is a marketing channel and I want to own it. Like I want my business to own this marketing channel as an asset. So I want to have the VA run it. I want to have all the scripts and the SOPs and stuff as part of our business. Because if I send this to a podcast guesting agency, maybe someday I'll do done for you services and I'll do this a different way. Their business models, though, the way it works now is you pay them, for 20 episodes or 20 bookings, and they just send you the same 20 podcasts they send everyone to because it's easy to get yeses, and they're not strategic at all. So they skip that part that I started with about the guest list or like the relationship with the host. Like there's nuanced reasons to be on shows. You'll never get that. I know you guys are all agency owners. I don't mean this like against agencies, but podcast guesting agencies, I'm pretty deep in this world. Everyone I've seen so far, they just aren't going to be as strategic. Like they just can't be. They can't take that level of attention. They're not going to care about your business as much as you. So that was a very long answer, but that's kind of how I've seen the alternatives to pitching and like how we do it versus how I've seen agencies do it or mass cold emails do it.
Well, and I think what just from that whole summary, basically what you said was automation is possible, but you got to do it yourself, structure it perfectly, make sure it's targeted, and do all the hard work up front, which is actually just the process of automation for anything, if it's going to work.
Garbage in, garbage out. So yeah, if you want a great result, you can't automate, but you got to put really good effort into the front end of that to make the automation actually quality. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I will say that like what you said about the, hitting the approach of like, if you have enough celebrity, because I have done some where somebody's like, actually it wasn't even for podcasts. I just contacted like, hey, can I chat with you? And she said, I was, Forbes 30 under 30 last year and blah, blah, blah. I was like, holy crap, this is actually a person. And
Damon John reaches out and is like, Mark, you're not going to expect the 4 bullet points of how he's going to give value to the audience. He's like, dude, I'm on Shark Tank. Let me on your show. And you're like, yeah, of course. Because that's the power of being a celebrity or an authority in your niche. Like you don't have to be a TV celebrity, but if you get to be, Ezra Firestone is probably a great example. Like my wife would have no idea who he is, but anyone in e-commerce knows he's the top dog, right? So if Ezra reaches out, you probably already know him, but even if you don't, you're going to pretty much say yes. It doesn't have to be nearly as compelling as it does if little old Dustin Riechmann reaches out and like, I got to really show how I'm going to give value to your audience because you probably haven't heard of me and you don't know me as like a celebrity in my niche yet.
Well, what's funny is that I actually use the same approach. If I want, somebody who I see online and they're obviously, big and busy, then I'll lead the podcast with, hey, we get 50,000 downloads a month and we have 1 million people on our email list and we have hundreds of thousands of hits on the website every month. Like, come on the podcast and you could benefit from all these things. So it works in the reverse too. Sometimes I need to do more often.
And you could, and like, that's a great example. You can leverage the credibility of digital marketer. I'm the president of digital marketer. That's pretty much all you have to say in the email. If they're not aware of that somehow, then you're like, we have 1 million people on our email list. I would love to be on your show and we will share that on our email list or something like. So but for almost everyone else, for that's the 1%, right? For those of us who aren't the president of digital marketer, we have to do a little more legwork to show the host how we can value the audience.
No, that's a great approach. Well, I think I've sucked up half the time. So let's hear some questions from the audience. Who wants to know from Dustin how to get on more podcasts, how to make those podcasts actually pay and turn podcasting into a marketing channel versus just a awareness hope, which is, I think, what it is. I'll keep going with questions if nobody has any, but won't give everybody 30 seconds. Mickey, I know you got like 100 burning questions. And you got unmute. There's only a few of us, so if you have a question, you can just say it.
Sure. Hi, Dustin.
Hi.
What would you say is the biggest difference between like a great follow-up as a podcast guest versus one that kind of misses the mark?
Would you say follow up with the host?
Yeah.
I think when I think of follow up, there's a couple of things I actually did not. So we're kind of smiling at each other because I was a guest on Mickey's show over the summer, and I actually did a horrible job following up. She followed up with me though recently, and now we're like doing work together. So don't do what I did with Mickey, like just forget. And like it was the summer and I was on vacation, but no, typically though, what I'll do, I'll make sure that when it goes live, typically they're going to reach out to you and say, hey, your episode's live. And there may be some assets to share. So number one thing I do now is I leave an iTunes review at that point, because for a host, that's like very important, but they don't typically ask people to do it, or people don't follow up. So I'll just like, okay, it's like, that's like a standard operating procedure. I can actually have a VA do it, but I do it personally. As soon as it hits, I get on my phone, I open iTunes, I leave a review because it's top of mind. So, and I usually don't actually tell them I did it. I don't know if do you guys get alerted when people leave you an iTunes review?
No, the contact thing is terrible. So
okay, well, that's good to know, because I actually don't have a podcast, ironically. So I don't know that, but so now on, I'll make sure I let them know I give them an iTunes review. And then I'll usually just, that's the point that prompts me to do that follow-up. I'll reach out and be like, I just want to, say thank you again for having me on the show. And like try to give them value. That could be referring them to another guest. That could be I'm friends with so-and-so. I think you'd make a great guest on their show if you want to, to help grow your own show. So just trying to be cool in some way and serve them and give them some more value. I have not done this, but I have witnessed people who actually send physical gifts to the host. Like, and that's pretty cool. There's a guy that I came across that he would send. So he sent these wooden coasters, and he would have on one side would be his company logo, and on the other side would be the host company logo. So like a digital marketer logo, and then like, send it automated, and it was all automated too, which is pretty cool. So they had a system that, they had some custom, I don't know if it was on Etsy or something, someone who could do that pretty quickly. They would grab the logo, they would have that sent out, and I don't know how they found the shipping address without asking, but they would then ship that over. So that would be kind of the extreme example if you're like really wanting to leave an impression with someone. Like, and also handwritten notes. I've been on a guest on 2 different shows that the host sent me a handwritten note in the mail, and one of them sent me like a Starbucks gift card and just said, "Thanks so much for adding value to our audience." And that left an impression. I shared it on LinkedIn and tagged the guy, so there's a lot of cool stuff like that again, I'm not going to say I'm the world's best at it, but at a minimum, except when I forget, occasionally I'll send a follow-up message on LinkedIn or email, thanking them again, doing something to add value. And now I will PS, I left you an iTunes review. Really appreciated the opportunity to be on your show. Is there anything else I can do to help?
I love that. Well, and I actually like the idea of a gift because it gives somebody something to take a picture of with, like, hey, here's the logo. That was, I think Dennis, you sent me a pair of socks with my face on it. And so
That's awesome.
actually, I still have the sock. I gave them to my wife for our anniversary or something. I think was what happened to him, but it's super memorable. And then I was like, oh yeah, Dennis, he was on the show. Because I think a lot of people don't realize when you're doing the podcasting, like I'll do maybe 3 to 5 podcast episodes a week. And so It is easy to be like, oh, did we talk recently?
Right.
Because there's a lot going on. So any follow-up would be good. And if you went that extra step, it would be huge because very few people do. You good, Mickey? Gabe, I know you got some too.
I can keep going.
Oh, keep going.
So after you send the follow-up, I feel like there's like a gap that I see between like, okay, I'm sending you this message, I'm saying I'm here to help if anything comes up. And then there's like this abyss that all of a sudden you go into where you're like, where does this go now? What do I do? How do I close the gap between our appearance and us potentially working together? Do you have any tips or advice on that?
Yeah, it's the other problem I'm fixing. So I used to just kind of do this by memory, like it would usually happen like, so if I'm a guest on someone's show, I'll make sure I'm following them on LinkedIn, right? And so it would just kind of happen organically, like, oh, I see something Mickey posted on LinkedIn, so hey, Mickey, how are things going? That sort of thing. What I've realized now is this went way beyond the capacity of my brain, because I'm not just focused on the host. I'm thinking of all these guests, and I've got this pipeline. And so I've been handling this with like Google Sheets, and it's been adequate, but now I'm going the CRM route. So I'm basically, I've got my email list for my different businesses, but I've never had like a personal CRM. And so I'm creating that now. Actually, I mentioned the assistant to help me with content. First thing she's actually do is help me set up the CRM. And in that CRM, there's a bunch of them. Like there's a free HubSpot. You can use like Notion. There's lots of different tools you can do this with. What was the one I just came across? It was a newer one, and it was specifically for what I'm about to say, which is like prompting you to follow up. Basically, like, so if you tag someone with a certain level, like this is a hot prospect, or like this is a high level content or client, like I want this frequency of contact. It's like watching LinkedIn, your email, whatever, and it knows as a centralized database, oh, Dustin had a LinkedIn comment or a DM with Mickey on this date, and then it like resets the clock. So it'll come to me. There's the name of a tool that actually does that. But any of these you can set obviously follow-up reminders, and just like, hey, it's been 3 months since you contacted Mickey, and then like that day here's 5 people you should be contacting today that you haven't talked to in the last 3 months. Then you send them a DM on LinkedIn or email, whatever's most appropriate for them. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Mickey? Like, well, you're talking, and like when the episode comes out, it's all warm, fuzzy, and then you never talk again. And it's such a wasted relationship value there.
Yeah, I find it's like you'll send the thank you message and then all of a sudden there's nothing and you just wait and hope. But I like the idea of getting those frequent reminders to just stay in touch so it doesn't kind of fall to the wayside.
Yeah.
Well, and I will say that even if you want to do it just to make sure that the episode gets published, because with us, like, since we're doing so many, sometimes I'll have people be like, hey, when, did you publish that episode? And I'll be like, oh no, we didn't publish that episode. And then I'll go to our podcast team and say like, what happened? And then we'll get it up. So it's like it's very important that you always follow up on when you're on a podcast, because there's a chance that it never got published and you want to find out why. And then a lot of times, like me, I'll be like, oh crap, put it on the top of the queue. Like, we dropped the ball. Let's go ahead and get this out there. And then we'll make a bigger push because we forgot. And then, then it's like double bonus,
Yeah, that's a great point, because I'm reliant in what I'm doing currently on the host coming back to me and saying your episode's been released. And I flag that, and then I do my follow-ups, like I mentioned, but not every host does that, or it goes to spam, or whatever happens. And so if I'm dependent on that to follow up, or like you just said, Mark, if it never gets published, I'll never know. So I think as part of the CRM I'm developing, that will be, podcast hosts will have their own category. And I think that would be a great part of the flow is like, check here whenever this thing's actually went published. And if it's prompting you every like month, has it been published yet? And I can go look on iTunes and see if it actually has. So that's great.
Yeah.
I'm looking on my other screen right now. So it's Clay. There it is. So it's clay.earth is the tool that's like specifically always listening to your social stuff and your email to see when you've had contact with people. And so it's specifically that, whereas like the free HubSpot is extremely powerful, but I don't know for sure if it functions quite the same way this one does.
Well, and what I'll do, just so you guys know, you probably see me on LinkedIn, and sometimes I'll post, be like, oh, I just had this awesome podcast with so-and-so. I do that specifically so that I could track it publicly that we did the podcast. And if I think like, oh crap, did we do that? I can actually look back and see every time I posted that message, it gets a little bump for, the person who guessed, gives that instant like benefit for them. Like, oh yeah, if nothing else, we get a post with you tagged on it. And then it's a reminder for me that let's make sure the episode actually came out. And that's kind of the reverse side, because what's supposed to happen is when the episode comes out, we notify you, we post it online, we tag you in it, and then we send you a media kit that actually contains multiple dimensions of the artwork for the episode. That way you can upload it and share it and tag us in it, and that's how it's supposed to work.
Ironically, I don't think that actually happened with me.
I know. That's why I added the supposed to.
Yeah, I was like, I know, I was very keen on seeing when it came out. I actually had contact with the producer, and so I knew when it was coming out. But yeah, and I was like, I don't know. As you're talking, I'm like, I don't remember getting like a media kit to share, because I would be all over that.
Oh yeah. Well, what's happening is we actually just have a backlog, because it was like, okay, because what the ideal is supposed to be is not just the artwork for the episode. It should be short form video with a highlight clip, should be a highlight YouTube video, should be the full interview on YouTube, and then a bunch of other things like all the stuff I talked about in the content certification for digital marketer, where it's like, hey, here's how to take long form and turn it into short form. And there you go. The tricky part, that's where you need to automate, because as soon as you get those templates up, then definitely send that somewhere else, because then you don't have to think about it. Because if you're thinking about it, you're not going to do it. It's, the first time you do it, it will take you like 6 hours to create all that stuff. But once you have it, you could send it to wherever you want, and it'll take 30 minutes and you won't have to think about it. So that is super helpful. And I will follow up with your media kit specifically, because we talked about it right now. So
all right, well, I'll make a note to follow up, put you in my CRM and say, when did Mark tell me he's gonna get me this media kit?
I'm gonna say Monday, because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna make sure this happens. But no, and just a little tip for everybody else, like if you don't have a CRM, because a lot of times what happens is you're like, I should do it this way, and then you go down the rabbit hole of setting up a system for it. Then by the time you get the system implemented, you're like, I can't remember why I started this in the first place. Hopefully I covered it, and then blah, blah, blah. If you need a cheat, I would just say make an event, like you just came on the podcast, put an event on your Google Calendar or whatever it is, and just say follow up on podcasts you were on, blah, 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 and make it a 15-minute task 2 weeks from now, and you won't miss it at that point. So you have like 1,000 of those, then you will miss it. But you're
Yes.
not going to have that many. It'll be fine.
And you're harvesting the guest list, and for me, it's a great problem to have. Like I have so many leads and so many like I categorize the people in that guest list for me as like, do they have a podcast I could guest on? Checkbox one. Are they a referral partner? Like they're the center of influence that they can actually just give me clients, or I can give them clients. Number two, and then three is, would they be a potential client for me, like for my accelerator program? And it could be all three, but so that's what my Google sheet does now that I'm looking forward to my CRM doing. So it's a lot more searchable and a lot more, and it can have these prompts that come up to make sure that I'm actually following through on the ones, especially the ones that are leads. So.
Well, and I think you're doing it right, which is do 50 to 100 episodes, figure out the system, and then get into CRMs and automation and all the other stuff. Because prior to that, like you're going to get consumed by the setup process, and then you're going to forget, and then you're going to be like, it doesn't work because you didn't actually do the stuff that
the most important thing is actually go get on the podcast and get comfortable with that whole thing. And then you can get into more advanced strategies, of course.
Yeah, no. So I think that you're a perfect example of that. Now, in regards to just, turning the podcast guesting into a marketing channel, do you have objectives of like, I want to get on 10 a month, or I want to get on, what's the metrics you kind of use for assessment?
My flow is like one a week. That I feel like, and for most people, I feel like that's a healthy cadence. You can obviously do 10 a week if like you're really trying to ramp up and get and now I do less than that, but I'm able to get on bigger shows because I put in so many reps, right? I've been on about 50 shows over about 2 years. So that averages about one every other week. But there's certainly weeks where I'm doing 3, and then it's like I have a month where I'm not. And I guess this is not great advice for the agencies listening. If you haven't been doing podcast guesting as like a marketing channel, I'll talk about how that used to be for me, which is I was always doing these pitches and getting the opportunities, and then I eventually learned this whole idea of more advanced strategies to do the follow-up. But for me, and the lead flow that I need, and I think for agencies is pretty similar, like one a week. This is good. It also kind of keeps you on your game, and it makes it a consistent, systematic kind of habit, I'd say that's the biggest danger. If someone comes away from this and they're like really excited, like, oh, this is cool, like I'm going to go ask this person to be on their podcast, and then that's it. Like don't bother. Like I feel like to make this really effective, make it a system, make it a part of your business, like you would if you were running paid ads or anything else. Like you have to do that. You have to show up and put in the reps and do it on a consistent basis. And unfortunately, that's where the real magic comes from, right? Like, I don't know. For me, it was like, I remember back in my FireCreek Snacks days, I got on my first show and I've sold some meat sticks. So like, this is pretty cool. And I got on my second show, and I feel like that was when someone reached out as a distributor, and we got a cool opportunity out of it. And it was like, but it's like show number 10, where what I call like the network effect, or the halo effect, right? Like this sort of intangible energy that comes from doing something consistently started to happen, where like just really wild, cool stuff started happening that wouldn't have ever happened if I wouldn't been on the shows. But it's also not like I expected it to happen. Like I've got stories for days. The perpetual traffic episode, I talk about several of these. But one is like a podcast I was on in 2020. It's early 2021. It was a show. It was like by Snack Nation, and they're a company that sells snack sticks, right? Or they do subscriptions to companies for healthy snacks. I used that podcast to get a small placement test run in their subscription box. And that I thought that was it. And I was like, that was cool. Like we got this feedback. We might've got some customers out of it. We had to donate the snack sticks, but I thought it was cool. And then a year later in 2022, this woman reaches out in the beginning of the year and says, I'm now the buyer for salty snacks for Snack Nation. And I looked at our customer reviews, and I went back to the stuff that fits in our category, and I listened to all the podcasts because it was their own podcast that I was on. And she said, your story is very compelling. I love the branding and the health claims or whatever. And she purchased 550,000 snack sticks. So for the year 2022, right? Like spread out, but like literally there's no chance I would have ever had that happen had I not been on that podcast. But it's not like I got on that podcast thinking I'm going to sell 550,000 snack sticks the next year.
This doesn't produce 500,000.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like there's you should do it so that for the agencies listening, you should do it so you can go find clients. The host might be a client, someone listening might be a client, or other guests might be clients, as I mentioned. But keep in mind that if you do it consistently, like anything, like that's where this crazy opportunities come from, is doing it. Like if you post twice a day on LinkedIn and it's really quality content, like at some point you're going to have some really cool relationship come from that. But I can't predict when, and I can't predict how big. Same thing with podcast guesting. I feel like podcast guesting is a little uniquely cool because you get all three of those layers. Like you don't really get that anywhere else. Like you're not going to do a bunch of Facebook ads and then like, like have some unicorn result. Like maybe you'll get a 4 ROAS instead of a 3.5. That's awesome, but like this is relational. So that makes it unique. It's long form educational. That makes it unique. And it's repurposeful, if that's a word. And I think so that, I don't know. I just see so many cool benefits of podcast guesting that there's really no other format that matches it in the way that I like to use it. So.
Oh, well, and I completely agree. And from a content perspective, I think it's the easiest thing you could do, because in terms of like, hey, I could write an article, I could shoot a video, or I could show up on somebody else's show and have them produce the content, distribute the content, promote the content. Like there's no other form like it. Like it's just so easy. And on top of that, for me, it's like, because I always like, I'm going to write an article a week. And if I don't do that, nobody's going to notice. But with a podcast episode, if I'm supposed to show up on somebody's podcast, then now you're taking, that kind of motivation is now external, because it's going to be that person who's going to push you to do it. Now it's not up to you. You're just doing what you said you were going to do for somebody else who's going to be mad if you don't do it. So it's, I think if you aren't making content right now, podcast guesting is super, it's just the best thing you can do. And if you're not good at being interviewed or making statements, then you should definitely do it, because you'll get better at it. And there's no other place where you could do something like that other than, for me, I joined BNI and I was like, I got to stand up and give a 60-second speech. And then I got better at doing that. But, it was, again, externally motivated, which
I had a woman she was talking about, she didn't know what lead magnet. She had a book and she does like relationship coaching, and she didn't know what a lead magnet should be. And she wanted to know that before she'd ever get on a podcast. I'm like, the best way to figure out what it is go pick some lower volume shows that aren't, no pressure kind of shows, and just go be interviewed. Or like, I'll interview you and let's do a mock interview. Like in the process of verbally processing this, you're going to find the gold nuggets that the person is going to be like, wait, that was really interesting. Repeat that. Or like, oh, tell me more about that. And that's going to be your lead magnet. That's your hook. But like I said, you can go sit in your closet for 3 months and try to like meditate around what your lead magnet should be. You're never going to figure it out. Like just go be on a podcast or in another format, go talk yeah. So anyway, I don't know if she took my advice, but I feel like I've found personally, like there's just no replacing. You can tell by the way I go off on these tangents. I'm a verbal processor, so maybe that comes more natural to me. But I think for anyone, you can get a lot better with just putting in the reps, like anything, right? Like you want to be a better writer, write a lot. If you want to be a good interviewer and know how to like succinctly talk about what you do and the results you get for clients, do podcast interviews.
Well, and just so everybody knows, like me personally, like I spent the entire year trying to get better at interviewing people. And now I have Dustin who says that I'm good at interviewing. I'm like, yeah, I wasn't at first, but it's always been, well, everybody likes to look at the end result and be like, oh, I want to be like that person. It's like, yeah, start a year ago and you could be like that person, or start right now and you'll be like that in a year, but it's all practice. So if somebody's not good at it, just keep doing it and really think about it. I think what I saw a speaker, I forget his name, he was a magician actually, and he was talking about, hey, if you want to get good on video, shoot yourself doing the video and then watch it for an hour and take notes and mark every time you said and he went through a whole process of like evaluating how to get better at video. I was like, oh man, that is painful.
I hate, everyone hates listening to their own voice, right? But so like in my accelerator groups, we do that though. It's like if someone's really nervous, I'll like, let's go on Zoom. I'm going to be, Mark today, and I'll just ask you questions and we'll see how you respond. And you can go back and critique that. So I think like mock interviews with a friend or a coach could be really good. And then, watching the game tape, unfortunately, is actually really, really useful. As awkward as it may seem, like go back and listen to especially your first episodes and see like, man, I talked for 5 minutes. That could have been a 5-second response, that sort of thing. Or the or like all these like verbal tics that all of us have. You shouldn't try to remove those completely and be a robot. But if you can get better by going back and reviewing how you did. And and then I like when people actually have the interviews published in my group, then I go listen on their behalf. I go listen to them and give them constructive criticism. I think that can be super helpful too.
Oh yeah. Yeah. If you could get, kind of third party information about somebody like, hey, what'd you think of this? And it's a person who's not going to just say like, it was great. And then actually
or it sucked. Yeah.
That's actually more useful. Like, oh man, I hated this. I'm like, whoa, oh my God.
You should never do another podcast again.
You should just go away. Like, oh, all right, never mind. That wasn't the criticism I wanted, but thanks. Well, this has been great, Dustin. We got a few minutes left. Any last minute questions for Dustin? Otherwise, we'll get into where people could learn more about how to get better at podcast guesting and everything else you do.
Sure. Well, I'm going to put a link for a free resource in the chat. It's simplesuccesscoaching.com/DM. I don't know if this will actually be a link. I'll try. And that's my podcast pitch playbook. So if you guys are like, this is really interesting, I'd like to learn more specifically about how I approach podcast pitching. And actually, I include 3 pitches I have sent to pretty large podcasts and got yeses with the single cold email outreach. And you can copy and paste those and then obviously customize them to your own needs. So that's there for free. simplesuccesscoaching.com/DM. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, and simplesuccesscoaching.com is obviously my main site. I mentioned my accelerator, so I do those 3 times a year. I got one coming up starting in the middle of January. So if you're into this, Mickey's going to be in it. If you're really into this, and you're like, I want to like focus on this. It's a 90-day, mastermind sort of group coaching approach to everything we talked about today, including how to really leverage every opportunity to grow your agency with podcast guesting.
Awesome. Well, just like the podcast interview, I think this one fantastic, excellent answers, very actionable, and some of those tips you gave are just huge. Like the iTunes review, where I'm like, oh yeah, man, I would really appreciate that if a guest did that. And then like you came on this show, I'm like, oh,
I don't know if I left you one. So whenever you send me my media kit,
I know. I'm looking you up right now. I'm like, I think I actually have your media. Oh, I do. I have all of your content. We just haven't published yet. But it was only the 23rd, so it's not that old.
No, it's not. And then actually, that's great, because that means maybe there'll be another bump of traffic.
Oh my gosh, I have like a lot of stuff for you, and it's already produced. Anyway, I will send you that after this, and everybody can enjoy it today because we'll publish it right now.
Awesome.
Oh,
I'm the worst. All right, Michelle, you want to take us out?
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Jason's Agencies Talk. And thank you to Dustin for hopping on with us. This was a lot of fun. I'm now going to trademark proactive podcast guesting.
Oh, sounds like a system, a framework.
Right?
We're all racing to GoDaddy.
See, Mark, get to it first.
Oh, I have too many domains already.
Oh, yes, they're all marketers buy domains. But thank you, everybody, for coming. A recording of this will be found in the Certified Partner Facebook group and inside of DM Academy in the training section. But if y'all have any other questions, please feel free to hop into the Facebook group, or you can reach out to Dustin at that nifty little link he dropped for everyone, simplesuccesscoaching.com/DM. And thank you, everyone, for a fantastic week. We will see you again in 2 weeks on the 16th.
Yes. Company meetup next
Bye,
week.
guys.
Thank y'all.
See you guys.